Welcome to our participants today. Folks are still joining us, but we'll get started as we have some statement of solidarity and things like that to get through first. My name is Niall Richardson. I am a part of the member engagement team here at PIPS. I'm also joined by my colleague Felipe Godoy, as well as Taya Van Dyke and Dean Tonsik from our National Policy Office. To begin, we would like to take some time to respectfully acknowledge that our office, located in Ottawa, is on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. Before this land was a city, it was and remains a place for the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, whose presence here reaches back over 8,000 years. As settlers, it is our responsibility to educate ourselves on the history of the First Peoples, to learn how to be respectful of their culture, to acknowledge their pain and our part in it. This journey of understanding is uncomfortable, but part of discovering our past and how we continue to benefit from it is the duty to grow and to change in order to want to do better. Working towards change, we can be hopeful that our journey guides us to a peaceful, inclusive, and respectful future, one where we can hope to have done the work required to be seen as guests of this great land and its first peoples, and to be a part of their community. If you've started the journey of learning whose territory you live or work on, we invite you to make an acknowledgement in the Q&A tool in Zoom. At the beginning of our webinars, we like to provide you with our equity statement, which clearly outlines our expectations from participants. If you could take a moment to review this statement, the link is in the chat box. As noted, the Professional Institute of the Public Service of Canada strives to create a climate that is respectful, safe, and inclusive, where we all feel welcome and valued, and where we are supported to make our contribution and support others to make theirs. We thank you for being a part of this inclusive space today. Now I'll just go over some of the key information from Zoom. Due to the size of the group, we have muted your computers to ensure we have the best sound quality for everyone participating and for those who will watch later. Please use the Q&A icon in Zoom to send a message if you have any questions or technical issues during the webinar. Today, we're going to discuss workforce adjustment in the public service and how it may affect you. We will have a question and answer period at the end of our session. I will now pass it over to Dean and Taya to begin today's information session.
Thank you very much, Niall. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. The purpose of today's presentation is to go over the Workforce Adjustment Directive. It's very technical in nature. The whole point is to provide you with an overview, mindful of the time. We have an hour with you today, so we want to make sure that we go over the presentation and allow for questions and answers. To begin with, I'll start going over in terms of the technical nature. I just want to give you in terms of information, in terms of how the WFA process goes, in terms of notifications and whatnot. Our numbers are almost up to date. We're getting, folks are going to get notifications soon. We don't know which departments will be provided with notifications. Normally, the employer affords us 24 hours notice in terms of which employees may be impacted or affected. And we'll go over the different terminologies in terms of, well, what is an affected employee? Does that mean that they're going to be having to compete for a job? As their job status in jeopardy? So we'll go over all these technical nuances and definitions. And again, this presentation will be available to you. And at the end of the presentation, we'll list other resources available in terms of what we have and quick Q's and A's on our website, access to your regional office, and even the information that our national office presents. So without further ado, I will get into the presentation. And yes, we look forward to hearing from you during the Q&A session. So today, like, this information will fluctuate, but these are the main departments that have been where employees have received that are affected employees. So again, I'll go over the definition. You'll notice the Department of Justice and our CAN. Those are the bigger numbers. The Canada Revenue Agency. So these are, in a nutshell, these are the departments that are impacted. More departments will be impacted, and we'll obviously update our chart as the information comes in. Next slide, please. Uh, so are you familiar with workforce adjustment? What does it mean? It's important for us to note that our workforce adjustment directive is incorporated in our collective agreement. So PIPS negotiates the WFA directive separately than, for example, the NJC, the National Joint Council Directive. You'll hear that sometimes term used interchangeably. And we just want to caution our folks that for PIPS members, we have our own language, and our first default would be to look in our collective agreement under the appendices and not refer to the National Joint Council. I know the smaller unions, for example, CAPE, ACFO, they use the National Joint Council Directive, but for our purposes, clearly we have our own, and we reference that. And that's why we always make sure you have the right collective agreement in front of you. And between collective agreements, the language is essentially the same, but there's some variances. So you want to make sure that you're applying the correct collective agreement. Next slide, please, Niall. So workforce adjustment applies to indeterminate employees in the core public administration and separate agencies. For term employees are not included, so these protections are not extended to term employees or casual employees. For example, the workforce adjustment appendix directive applies to our indeterminate folks. Again, so the primary objective of the workforce adjustment directive is to ensure continued employment by maximizing employment opportunities and minimizing layoffs. So you'll see during the presentation, how we go about that. The implementation of workforce adjustment committees are mandatory, for example, when notices are sent to employees that their employment may be impacted, that their positions may be impacted. So there's an automatic requirement to have a workforce adjustment committee in place. And we'll see that during at these committees where we ask more probing questions in terms of, okay, why is this, for example, service delivery being impacted? Why are these positions being impacted? Have you looked at minimizing the impact? So we'll get into that a little further. Again, PIPS's role is to ensure departments properly implement workforce adjustment provisions and support members in accessing all benefits and options available to them. Next slide, please. So the prerogative is with the department. So PIPS is not consulted beforehand when cuts are being made. So departments decide that the services of one or more indeterminate employees will no longer be required beyond a specified date due to a lack of work, discontinuance of a function, the relocation of a work unit, or the closure of an office or work location. So although the employer has a prerogative, they notwithstanding would need to consult us during the workforce adjustment committee meetings. They have final say in terms of what positions will be eliminated, but it doesn't go without, they would need to take our points of view under consideration. So that's a key factor that needs to be included, the need for consultation. Next slide, please, Niall. So the first step, obviously, is, we hear lots of rumors and whatnot, and that's distressing in of itself because we hear it, through the grapevine, we hear it on Reddit and the news, and nothing is official until you receive an official written notification. So what does that notification entail? The employee is considered affected under workforce adjustment. Affected status essentially means that the employee is part of a group of workers who may be workforce adjusted or made surplus. At this point in the process, it does not mean that the employee will be workforce adjusted. So you may receive notification that your position is affected, but the status quo may prevail. It doesn't impact or it doesn't at this point jeopardize your employment, if I can use the term. And we'll go into what these different processes entail and different definitions. Next slide, please. Now. So there are three possibilities. An indeterminate employee may end up not being workforce adjusted unless they receive written notification that their services are no longer required. Okay, so that's the first possibility. The next one, if they receive written notification that their services are no longer required with the guarantee of a reasonable job offer, the status becomes surplus status. And we'll go over each definition. If they receive written notification that their services are no longer required without the guarantee of a reasonable job offer, they become an opting employee. Next slide, please. So what is a reasonable job offer? So offer of indeterminate employment in the core public administration or a separate agency. Normally at equivalent level, the employee must be trainable and mobile. So, the employer has a responsibility to ensure that, wait a second, if it's normally at an equivalent level, but if there's, for example, a need to, for refresher courses or for some, to be made aware of other policies in place and that require a refresher. The employer needs to take that into consideration, and it can't just turn around and say, "Oh, you're not up to date on every facet of this position requirement. We will not accommodate you, or will not allow you to take training to get yourself up to speed." And we'll see that essentially you have to meet the essential requirements of the position, if I can use the term. You have to meet the language requirements and normally and the education requirements, right? Those are the minimal requirements, essential qualifications need to be met. Everything else can be worked on. So as part of a reasonable job offer, it's the first zone is with the employee's headquarters area. Second zone within 40 kilometers of the employee's place of work, and the third zone beyond 40 kilometers. So essentially what this means is a reasonable job offer if you live in Ottawa, a reasonable job offer in Newfoundland can be deemed reasonable because it's beyond 40 kilometers. However, we need to also mention the fact that as part of the employer's duties, when they make a reasonable job offer, they need to look at your individual circumstances as well, especially if you have accommodation needs, if you have, in terms of family obligations, if you care for elderly parents and they can't just simply uproot, yourself or your family to move from Ottawa to Newfoundland. They need to look into that. It's part of their legal obligation to accommodate. Similarly, if you have young children that you can't just pull out of school, they need to take that into account as well. So that's part of their duty to accommodate. It's a right that's protected under the Canadian Human Rights Act, under your collective agreement as well. So it's important for us to mention this, that it just can't be applied uniformly. Management has to look at in each individual circumstance to ensure that they're meeting their legal obligations in terms of, accommodation. You may have mobility issues personally, and traveling for you is an issue. So they need to take that into account. I mean, there are various, possible scenarios that come into play, but at the core of it is the employer has to look at your situation holistically. And if there's any accommodation needs, those are important to be put forward when management provides an employee with a reasonable job offer. In some circumstances, reasonable may include a lower level position, appointment with salary protection. We'll get into that a little further into the presentation. Next slide, please. Thank you. So once a guarantee of reasonable job offer is issued, the employee is placed on what we call paid surplus priority status and expected to continue to be assigned meaningful work. So management, I get you get an affected letter. You said your position is impacted, but management is offering you made you a guaranteed reasonable job offer. You may not, it may be indefinite in terms of or indeterminate when you will be getting this new position and when you'll be working in that new position. But in the meantime, what's important is that you continue to be paid at level, same salary, your benefits don't change. You have your reasonable job offer, even though you're not in the new position yet. You continue to be working at level, conducting meaningful work. So they can't just say, "Oh well, we're eliminating your position, we're giving you a new position, but in the meantime, we're not going to assign any meaningful work," right? They can't do that. It has to be meaningful, continued within your group and level, with commensurate with your education and expertise. So we want people to be reassured that they will continue at level and nothing will change for the time being until the reasonable job offer is materializes. It may be that it never materializes and they'll change their minds and say, you know what, we thought that we're going to eliminate your position and we're backtracking. So that's a possibility too. Employees would be entitled, there's a legislated entitlement to the employee for priority appointment to another position in the core public administration or a separate agency for which they meet the essential qualifications. Right. And when I spoke to essential qualifications, usually it means the educational requirements and the language requirements. Those are the most usually the most sought after. There's no maximum time limit to the surplus period, which lasts until resignation or a reasonable job offer is accepted or refused. So, like I alluded to earlier, you may have in this position indeterminately until, well, there's a change, until you resign or a reasonable job offer is made and you accept it or refuse it. And then we'll go over the consequences of each scenario. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the employee either accepts a job offer, the situation is resolved. If appointed to a lower position, a lower level position, employee is salary protected and placed in reinstatement priority status or reappointment to formal level. Essentially, that means, so I'll say I'm an IT3, but the only position they can offer me is an IT2. I'm salary protected at the IT group and level. And again, there are consequences from that perspective because salary, you may be behind in terms of salary progression, in terms of depending on how many years you could potentially be in that position. So that's something to be considered. But essentially, what this means as well is that even though you're in a lower position, you were offered a lower level position, you will be placed on what we call this reinstatement priority status, and it's governed by the Public Service Commission. So if there's an IT3 position that becomes available, they can say, "Oh, Dean, we're looking at you to appoint you back to the at level position." So that's possible as well. So it's not because you received a lower level position as a reasonable job offer that you're stuck in a lower level position with salary protection. If an employee refuses a reasonable job offer, they will be considered laid off, but no sooner than 6 months from beginning of the surplus period. 1 month layoff notice is required, and layoff priority status for 1 year. And you'd be considered laid off for severance purposes, for severance pay. So we can expand on those a little later during our Q&A, but I'll now defer to my colleague Taya for the next part of the presentation.
Thank you, Dean. So if you are not in receipt of a guarantee of a reasonable job offer, and you are an opting employee, you would receive a letter informing you of your opting status and be provided with three options in which you'll have 120 days to make a decision. The options are option A, a 12-month limited surplus priority status. Option B, the transition support measure, which allows you to resign from the public service with a lump sum payment. Or option C, the education allowance, which allows you to resign from the public service or go on leave without pay to attend an educational institution. The following slides dive deeper into each of these options, but I did want to note that an employee must choose one of these three options within that 120-day opting period, and this choice can't change once it's been submitted, so that will be final. But if you fail to select an option within that opting period, it will have been deemed that you selected option A, the 12-month limited surplus priority status. Next slide, please. Starting with option A, the 12-month surplus priority status, this means that you would be declared surplus and given priority status for appointments to other positions within the greater public service for 12 months. For these positions, you need to meet the essential qualifications of the appointment, including the language qualifications as Dean had described. And the employee will have 12 months to seek out and receive a reasonable offer for another indeterminate position, typically again at the same level. If you receive and accept this reasonable job offer, the situation is resolved. And if you accept the reasonable job offer at a lower level, they're salary protected and placed in reinstatement priority status. Similarly to what Dean described earlier, if there is no reasonable job offer provided within 12 months, that employee will be laid off. If a reasonable job offer is provided and the employee refuses, they can also be laid off, but not 6 months, not before 6 months has passed since you were first declared surplus. If you are laid off, the employee is switched from surplus priority status to layoff priority status for another 12 months, giving employees priority right for reappointment into the public service for 12 months following their layoff date. Next slide, please. Option B is the transition support measure. So instead of staying with the public service to try and secure a reasonable job offer, an opting employee can choose to resign with a lump sum payment, which is called the transition support measure or TSM. This lump sum payment is based on years of service, and the cash amounts will range between 4 to 52 weeks worth of salary, and the specifics of these amounts are laid out in the collective agreement. Although it does require a resignation from the public service, it is treated as a layoff for the purposes of severance pay. And in cases where there is a layoff, that date will be established by the employer. When an employee resigns and then receives the transition support measure, any priority rights to reappointment into the public service are no longer. In addition to the lump sum payment, which can be split into two payments over a period of 2 years, employees are also eligible for reimbursement of career and financial and counseling services that they access with the purpose of supporting them through this transition. Next slide, please. And the last option is the education allowance. So this is similar to option B with the added benefit of financial support. Typically, it's $17,000 or up to $17,000 for to cover education expenses to go back to school. So these expenses would include things like tuition, the cost of your books, any mandatory equipment you need through your studies. There are two options to exercise option C. So the first is an employee could resign from the public service, receive the transition support measure, and reimbursement for education expenses. Choosing this option when you resign, again, you don't have surplus or layoff priority rights into reappointment. But on the other hand, there's the option to go on leave without pay for up to 2 years, where you attend a education institution, and during those 2 years, you are still considered an employee of the public service, and you would continue to have access to benefits where you're paying the employer and employee share of the plans and benefit plans and RSP. During the leave without pay, you have an obligation to provide a proof of registration within the first 12 months, or it will be declared that you have been laid off. Following a leave without pay, if you haven't found alternate employment within the public service, that will also be considered laid off and laid off for the purposes of severance pay as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. The Voluntary Departure Program is a program that allows employees to volunteer to leave the public service when they've been declared affected prior to entering a SURLO process, which is a process where employees are either selected for retention or to be laid off. The Voluntary Departure Program does not apply to those who have been in receipt of a guarantee of a reasonable job offer. The employer will run a voluntary departure program when there are 5 or more affected employees at the same group and at the same level who are not in receipt of a guarantee of a reasonable job offer. If someone does volunteer, they become opting employees and then would have access to those options that we covered in the last few slides. If there are more volunteers who volunteer to leave the public service, then there are a number of positions to eliminate. That's when seniority would come into play for management to choose amongst those volunteers. Next slide, please. SURLO is an acronym for Selection for Retention or Layoff. It's a process that's overseen by the Public Service Commission, and it's used in WFA situations to decide which employees will be retained and stay and which employees will be selected for layoff. It is a different process than a staffing appointment process. It's different essentially because employees already have met the criteria of their current position, so it requires a different process with different criteria, different selection methods. Employees who are impacted by a SURLO process will be notified, and employees whose positions are affected or if they perform similar duties will also be included in the process. PIPS has a FAQ on the website that addresses questions related to the criteria and assessment methods, and that's linked at the end of the slide deck. Next slide, please. Alternation is a process when an opting employee or someone who has chosen that 12-month limited surplus priority period and they want to remain in the public service, they'll exchange positions with a non-affected indeterminate employee who is willing to leave the public service. That non-affected employee we call them the alternate. So the alternate would be able to leave the public service with either the transition support measure, so that lump sum payment based on years of service, or the education allowance. So they could resign or go on leave without pay. They can resign. The opting employee would then take over their position and they would remain employed. Because both the position in which the opting employee has and the position which the alternate has, they both can't be kept. One must be permanently eliminated. The exchange of positions happens on one day and it requires management approval. The WFA appendix requires all departments to participate in alternation. So this allows an opting employee in one department to access alternation opportunities that could come up in another department. In November, PIPS launched an alternation platform. This can be found on the PIPS website as well, which helps opting and surplus employees search for these alternation opportunities. And recently we learned that departments will be required to use the TBS alternation platform, serving as the centralized point for alternation for public servants. I believe that this is up and running now on the TBS applications portal. Next slide, please. The opting employee has 120 days to consider their WFA options, and it's during this 120 days that all opting employees can seek out alternative opportunities. Alternation, as I mentioned, occurs on a specific date because it's the direct exchange of positions. And alternation continues to be available to those who choose option A, the 12-month surplus priority period. And that option, the alternation option, will remain in place until the end of their surplus period. Both employees involved in an alternation must be able to meet the requirements of the other position, including language and essential qualifications. The exception here is when the alternate is going to leave the public service within 5 days of the alternation date. And in that case, they don't need to meet those conditions of the other position. Normally, alternation will occur at the same group and level, for example, 2 IT5s, but if they're not identical, alternation is still possible if they're considered equivalent, meaning the higher paid position is no more than 6% of the other. And I will hand it back over to Dean. Thank you.
Thanks, Thea. Okay, now thanks for that. Now we're going to get it, as we alluded to earlier, in terms of a broad overview of what the employer obligations are. Again, as we mentioned, the key is to ensure is to maximize employment opportunities for indeterminate employees. So indeterminate employment, ensure that employees are given every reasonable opportunity to continue their careers in the public service, and that employees are treated equitably. And again, that includes, as I mentioned earlier, taking into consideration accommodation needs. If you are one of the folks that need to go through a SURLO process, for example, and you have accommodation needs, they need to take that into account. You have a right to take the test in the language of your own choice. If you need help with, if there are physical barriers that you have help with, or other type of barriers, they need to account for that. An employer must consult with unions as completely as soon as possible and establish these workforce adjustment committees. And as I alluded to earlier, it's during these committees where we would ask probing questions. Have you looked at contractors? Have you looked at casuals? Student employment? Like, have you looked at those before trying to cut, for example, indeterminate employment, right? So those are probing questions that we would ask the employer, and they'd have to ultimately account and answer and be reasonable in their responses, even though they have the final say in terms of what positions are going to be eliminated and how they're going to go about it. They need to be forthright and reasonable. And this is our opportunity to call them out, and to make sure that they are minimizing the impact on indeterminate employment. So they need to carry out effective human resources planning, and as I said, the review of all these private consultants, agencies, look at employees that are not indeterminate, casual term, and and facilitate the appointment of surplus or laid off persons. Also, I just wanted to briefly chat on the SURLO process. That's the selection for retention of layoff. So that's the last part of the process. So those folks who have not received a guarantee of a reasonable job offer, who want to remain in the public service, and where the employer essentially, what this means is you're competing for a job that you're already qualified for. You meet the minimum educational requirements or the language requirements. But the processes can be a written exam. They can be they could have there can be a interview, reference check. It could be one of or all or part or just oral and written, or no, we're just going to do reference check. What's important there is that it has to be applied equitably and consistently. They can't say, well, for Dean, I'm going to run a written exam. I want you to conduct an interview, and I'm going to check your references. Whereas for Taya, we're just going to look at her references, right? It has to be applied uniformly and consistently and fairly. So it may differ from manager to manager, depending on the section. So it's not going to be necessarily the same. They're not all going to have a written exam or an oral component and a reference check. That's left to the discretion of the hiring manager. But what's important is that it has to be for that exercise in question, staffing exercise, it has to be applied uniformly. So that's one of the points I wanted to make. Next slide, Taya. Sorry, now. Oh yeah, so this comes to the end of our presentation. In terms of the resources available, we have FAQs on our website. This webinar will be available for you to review as well, training sessions. But I will defer then to Niall in terms of other resources we may have available before we get into the Q&A portion of the presentation.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Dean and Taya, for all of that information. We just wanted to say that you should keep an eye on your inbox for invitations for upcoming WFA webinars, including more focused sessions on SURLO and VDP, alternation and surplus and opting employees. So we're doing some more in-depth webinars on those specific topics, and those are coming up in the next week or two. My webinar schedule is very full right now, so I can't remember exactly, but you should just keep an eye out for those invitations on those very focused sessions that are coming up. So we'll now take some time for question and answers. I notice quite a few people have been putting some questions already in the Q&A tool. It's located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We have about 20 minutes, so we'll do our best to kind of go through as many questions as we can. If we run out of time or you think of questions post-webinar, we suggest checking out all the very comprehensive FAQs. There's a flow chart on our website. You can also reach out to your local steward, and you can always send us a message using our Ask Us form, and we'll put all those links in the chat as well. So let me take a look at the questions that I have here. Okay, I'm going to start off with this one. Where could I find more information on what would be accepted as training for use of the $17,000? For example, could I get my PMP training and certification?
Good question. Thank you. Yes, we're getting, some departments are being more prescriptive in terms of the type of training you can get, but this I think is a one-off. Normally it's left at your discretion. So if you want to pursue, you want to take a technical, PMP, want to, get your certification there, or that's left to your discretion. The employer, in terms of what would they require, is only proof of registration, enrollment, and you have to do that fairly quickly in the process. But no, they don't normally have a say in the type of training, or whether it's post-secondary or post-university, or if it's another. They don't have a say necessarily. What they need is they would require proof of enrollment for to ensure that to pay out the the tuition, but that's left to the individual member employee to decide in terms of the type of training they want to or educational development they want to undertake.
Fantastic. I have an easy one. Is written notification sent via email or is it a mailed letter? Do you happen to know?
It's a good question. Normally, I mean, they would. I mean, mail is a standard way of proceeding, but I would think that it would. Well, there's privacy considerations, right? So you would get something normally in the mail, but it may include also getting something via either your personal mail or work mail. But again, that needs, I would the normal, the formal notification should be by mail, mailed letter. And then there are questions for folks who may be on leave without pay and whatnot. So if you're on leave without pay or on leave or you want to make sure your information is up to date, and PIPS can help with that too in terms of getting your information updated in the system. But to answer the question, it should be via letter at home.
Thanks. How does EI work with options A, B, and C? Do you get EI if you receive severance 12 months later and still can't find a job in or outside of the government?
Right. Normally, so the severance is would get it would depend on, you may not, you may have to go through the severance amount because that's considered income. So if you do receive severance, that will take into account and can be reduced uh, against the amount that you would receive as EI. You could, but it depends on the size of your severance, and then depending on the length of time you were away from the workplace, you're not able to find employment, you may be entitled. But again, any initial amount will be deducted from any EI you would be otherwise entitled.
Perfect. Is there still a step progression in a salary protected status after a year, or are you stuck at the same pay step until a job change?
No, you would still be governed. So so you would be governed by the your previous. So if I'm in a salary protected IT3 position, the IT3 salary grid will apply, right? And until it's renegotiated, if you're at the top, you would have to wait until there's a renegotiation. But no, you won't be. You'd still be entitled to progress depending on where you are in the pay grid on the salary scale.
Right. Is there a time limit for that reinstatement period, like a year of salary protection and then not?
No, salary protection usually is indefinite. So, but then you put on that priority state. Yeah. So a year, there's a 12-month, and that's a good question. So you remain on the priority list. Um, and afterwards, you may end up being salary protected indefinitely until you find a new position, or you resign, or retire. But yeah, it can be indefinite.
Okay. For the position exchange, how do they assess if you meet the requirements? Do you have an exam to do? I think you talked a little bit about that.
Yes. So, if you run through that SIRLO process, the selection for retention or layoff, yeah, they would, you would need to meet the minimum requirements of the position that will usually be listed, right? Whether it's, depending on the profile, the language, is it bilingual? Is it English imperative, CBC? So you look at that and the educational requirement. I know there's a question regarding the educational. Sometimes they'll say like minimum bachelor's degree in, economics or equivalent. So there could be that option. So your experience would be taken into account. It doesn't, so usually you'll have the equivalency. So a BA or master's and or equivalent. So that will be on the posting itself.
Great. For departments that are looking to staff positions within the next couple of years, will they be forced to look at the priority list to ensure WFA impacted employees can secure employment?
Yes, they would, as well as other employees who are on the priority status. I'm thinking of employees who are on sick leave without pay, who are waiting to be reappointed, because we know folks who, for example, who leave or who go on on extended parental leave. Sometimes their positions are not guaranteed, so they'd look at those priorities. But normally, layoff provision, people who have been laid off have priority entitlement, as well as those people who are been on sick leave, but whose positions have been filled permanently are now looking for another position. But to answer the question, yes, they would need to look at those positions, those folks who have been laid off.
Is there any compensation, e.g. TSM or severance, if you refuse a reasonable job offer?
No, no. If you refuse it, you would, unless within the notice period, you decide they'll give you maybe severance for, no sooner than 6 months. So maybe you'd be entitled to 6 months if you refuse a job offer and say, okay, well, you made me a job offer. I'm ready to leave. Just pay out the remainder, the severance entitlement I would otherwise receive. But the answer, the general question is no, you wouldn't receive severance because you refuse a reasonable job offer.
If someone is on pre-retirement leave, can they still be eligible for WFA volunteering?
Yes. Yeah, they could. It depends. We'll see some specific, sometimes the employer may try to say, oh, well, you're not eligible because you're already leaving. Well, no, you're still, it depends on your particular circumstances. Or if you're working 3 days or what your status is. Because normally when you're on pre-retirement leave, you're working 3 days a week, but for pension purposes, for example, you're contributing as if you were working 5 days a week, right? Full time. So yes, technically you would be, but I wouldn't be surprised if some managers would try to be creative and try to avoid, because they're saying, oh, you're already leaving, so we don't want to pay you additional severance, right? So that's something to look out for. And if this arises, I would recommend that you connect with your regional office for guidance and support.
Perfect. If you choose option B, TSM, do you get the TSM and severance pay?
Yes, you would normally.
Great. If our department is expecting initial letters to be sent out this week, is it likely those will mention a guaranteed reasonable job offer or the option path, or will we likely need to wait longer to get more information?
Some departments may say we've decided your position is affected, but we're going to make you a reasonable job offer. Yes, so that would be included in the initial. For those where departments are sure that there's a guarantee or reasonable job offer, it could be part of the initial letters, or they can just say your position has been affected. But normally it would say in the initials, they'll say either your position is affected, but we're making a reasonable job offer. Then you become surplus status, or no, you're not going to be in receipt of a reasonable job offer, and then you become an opting employee. So that would be part of the um, initial notification.
This one, have departments indicated approximately how many PIPS members will be affected?
No, unfortunately, we don't get that information beforehand. They decide, and they normally give us, the 24-hour notice, sometimes 48 hours, maybe a little longer. Um, but they don't. They'll eventually tell us, but not well in advance. No, under the collective agreement, it's literally 24 hours.
It sort of speaks to that a bit. Can we clarify, does that mean that in several months there can be several rounds of WFA, or the process of WFA can take several months, so we might not know this month?
It could take, well, it could take several months for this process to unfold, but yeah, I mean, once we know that's once you're part of the WFA process, it could take, it takes several months. It could take up to a year, right? Depending on the option you choose. So no, what was meant by that is that we don't know. It could take, the government, it depends how quickly they choose to put this in operation. It could, it could be done, by the spring. It could be, spill over into the summer. But once that whole process is done, then we have additional time because in terms of, let's say the employer says, okay, we're not going to provide any more notifications, no more impacted employees, but those who have been impacted already have, the collective agreement timelines have been triggered, right? And then it could take longer. If you choose an education allowance, well, you have all that extra time. Or if you chose option A, you have that extra 12 months. So I wanted to clarify that.
Perfect. I understand that the pension waiver incentives are not part of the collective agreement, but can you comment on whether you can get both a pension waiver as well as a TSM if you opt to leave as part of the voluntary departure program?
Yes, you would. Depends again on the pension waiver. If you meet the minimum, the requirements, but normally, yeah. And we're waiting for this to see the pension waiver again. This is legislated. I mean, by all indication, it'll pass. I mean, unless there's a vote conf, but it's part of the budget that needs to pass, right? And so we're waiting for that budget confirmation. But yes, if you meet the requirements, you would be entitled.
In option A, is the employee still employed in their substantive position and are they still getting paid with all benefits for 12 months?
Yes. Same level, same work. They can't, just say we're just gonna give you just busy work. We're gonna just assign you anything, administrative tasks or, no, there has to be meaningful work. Your salary and benefits are not impacted. And yeah, you continue as is.
Perfect. Does the process look different if an employee is on disability leave? Are there any additional protections for those on long-term disability?
No, but we do advise and we hope we counsel employers to take into account accommodation needs. If you're on leave, if you're on disability and you're called upon to make a decision, depends on your health. So that's where the accommodation um, uh, responsibilities, a duty to accommodate provisions kick in. So they need to be mindful. We encourage employers and that folks who are on disability or any other type of leave to wait for their leave um, to be over, then to engage the employee meaningfully in terms of, okay, well, your position has been affected. This is what we plan on doing. It can happen though during your leave, and if you're on disability, for example, then yeah, there's the duty to accommodate definitely kicks in. They can't be just say, okay, well, Dean, you've been on disability for the last 12, 14 months, but we're calling you to, we want to conduct this Serlo exercise. Well, wait a second, am I fit? Do I need any accommodation? Things like that. So yeah, they would have to look at your personal circumstances. But to answer the question, no, they're not. There are no additional protections other than those, under human rights law, right? The duty to accommodate and whatnot. So
With the Treasury Board's alternation portal, is the PIPS alternation portal registration still helpful? Is it helpful to be using PIPS and Treasury Board?
yes, I think yeah, the more you're out there, the better. The network opportunities, meeting. I would say the more you can put your name out there, the better it is, right? You're increasing your odds of potentially finding that match. So yes, we encourage folks to avail themselves of all of these networking opportunities.
I think you went through this a little bit, but someone is looking for clarity. What is considered a reasonable job offer? Is there a defined, like a definition?
Well,
Exact.
it can be, again, it has to be, reasonable. It has to be, it has to be commensurate with your education, your background, your experience. If I'm an IT, I keep using the IT example, but that's the one that comes to mind. But if I'm a CO or, a meteorologist, I can't. If I'm an IT person and you're offering me a job that requires me to work at Environment Canada as a meteorologist, that would be deemed unreasonable. I mean, being facetious here, but that's, they have to look at. Um, they have to look at your personal experience, your education, and potential for being able to being mobile and also being able to learn a new, for example, a new discipline. So I may be, for example, I had some procurement, but I have a procurement experience in procurement, but I've been doing IT for the last 10 years. Oh, well, Dean, maybe we can send you on a refresher course or some, things like that. So it has to be commensurate with your personal your skill set, again, your experience, your educational background, and looking at your personal circumstances. There was a question where, if I'm in Ottawa and I get a job offer in Newfoundland, it can be deemed unreasonable, definitely, but it can be deemed reasonable as well. So it depends on the circumstances. Um, but yeah, so there are different permutations. But essentially, if you meet the minimum requirements of the position, then it could potentially be deemed reasonable, including equivalency, right? I'm an IT3. If I can give me a PG4 or 5, but I would need that extra training, it could be deemed reasonable. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. I think we have time for a couple more. So I will go with, can those in an acting position expect to be returned to their substantive position before the WFA process begins within a department?
Yeah, because usually it's your substantive position that's impacted. So if you get, yeah, you could, because right, acting appointments can be ended by mutual agreement or unilaterally or exceptional circumstances. So you can be, because it's always your substantive position that's at play here. And there was an earlier question as well. If you're acting, I'm a IT represented by PIPS, but I'm in acting as as an AS in a PSAC represented position, another bargaining agent. So it's my substantive that would be impacted, and you would have right to representation. PIPS will represent you because it's your substantive that's being impacted, and they may determine that, oh, we're ending it, and you're returning to your substantive because that's the position that's being impacted.
Thank you for that clarification. I think we'll go with one last question. Is the employer obligated to provide these options, or could they not offer any and go straight to severance pay? And if so, how long would the process of layoffs take?
Right. No, they'd have to follow the collective agreement provisions. It's pretty strict that they either, if your position is impacted, either you get a reasonable job offer, a guarantee of a reasonable job offer or not. And then if not, well, then, then you have to be afforded the options. And the collective agreement's pretty prescriptive. And the employer cannot skip. And that's why, this offer of this early retirement incentive, there's a lot of talk about it. It's not an added it's not an added benefit. It's a benefit in the sense that for those who don't meet the minimal requirements to retire, right? If you're either 55 or 60 with at least 2 years of pensionable service, if you're a category 1 employee, that means if you're hired prior to 2013, right, and you have different contribution rates to your pension plan. I know we know there are folks hired after 2013, the minimum, for them to retire is extended by another 5 years, right? So the minimum retirement age without penalty is 60 years. So this is under normal circumstances. What this pension waiver is doing is basically saying, Dean, you're not 55 or 60 yet, you're at least 50. Okay, we're not going to penalize you for the fact that you're not 55. So you're not getting anything extra. You're just not getting penalized for not meeting the minimum requirements to retire, right? So I think that's something that sometimes it's hard to wrap our heads around. But for example, they're not going to give you an extra 5 years of pensionable service. There's nothing extra. It's just that you're not being penalized for. So if I'm, 51 with 15 years of public service experience, just to give you that as a scenario, normally and I'm a category 1 employee. That means I was hired prior to 2013. Obviously, if I have over, well, yeah, I would say, 15 years of public service. So yes, I'm prior 2013. All that means is, Dean, at 55, I would normally get a lifetime penalty of 2% for every year that I only meet the magic number, in this case, 60. So if I'm retiring at 51, I would normally get 18% penalty, lifetime penalty per year, right? Under normal circumstances, if I were to retire under the current legislative scheme, the Public Service Superannuation Act. The pension waiver offer is basically saying, Dean, it's okay. You're 51, you only have 15 years. We're not going to penalize you for not reaching the 55 or 60 years, in your case 60, because 55 would require me to have 30 years of pensionable service, but I'm far from that. So all they're saying is, Dean, at 51, we're going to take your 15 years, and rough estimate, that's about 30% of your best 5 years, right? So we're not going to penalize you, Dean, for not meeting the minimum threshold, but you're only going to be entitled to 30% of your pension of your best 5 years. So I wanted to make sure that's understood. And if you have more questions about this, feel free to reach out to us. I know time is up, but I know this is an important consideration, and because it's widely being circulated and being promoted, it's important that folks understand really what that means.
Yeah, and once we get more information, we would look to provide a more in-depth webinar on that topic as well. Again, that legislation hasn't been passed yet, so we don't have all of the information, but we would be sure to keep people up to date once we receive that. I want to thank you, Dean and Taya, today for all of the information and for answering so many questions. Once again, we've included links to the available WFA resources in the chat. You'll find our webpage has up-to-date FAQs, resources, flowchart, recordings of webinars. This one will probably go up as well. If you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to your local steward or contact us using the Ask Us forum. I mentioned this before, but keep an eye on your inbox for invitations to upcoming WFA webinars, including specific sessions focusing on SURLO, VDP, alternation and surplus, and opting employees. Those are coming in the next couple of weeks. We thank everyone for participating today, and we hope that you have a positive afternoon.